Hi, welcome to Medyascope. Today our guest is Heiko Wimmen. Mr. Wimmen is International Crisis Group's Project Director for Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. And today we will discuss the developments in northern Syria and the future of PYD in the region. Hi, Mr. Wimmen, thank you for participating in our show.
Hi, Zainab, it's a pleasure.
Hi, so I want to start with the recent article you published on Middle East Eye. In the article, you have advised to the PYD and YPG to distance themselves from their parent organization, namely PKK, in its fights against Turkey and pursue its own aim of regional autonomy in northern Syria. So I want to start with this. So what are the PKK and PYD strategic goals, how they are interwoven at the moment, and why do you think they need to be separated?
Okay, well, the PKK's ultimate goal, of course, is to fight against Turkey, to destroy or, let's say, change at least the nature of the rule that Turkey has established or has over the Kurdish areas in Turkey, the Kurdish majority areas in Turkey, and the influence that it exerts over the areas beyond the borders that are Kurdish populated. So that's the main goal, that's the essential goal. The leadership considers the nation state in the region as epitomized by Turkey as something that is incompatible with its goals. If we look at the PYD in Syria, we see that they have succeeded in establishing a de facto independent or largely autonomous area within Syria. Potentially, they could become part of a federalized Syria. They themselves have declared a federal union or federal region, and they could have this kind of autonomy, including Kurdish rights and all of these things, within a post-war Syria. Now, that is going to be very difficult to sustain if the PKK as a whole organization continues to confront Turkey and escalates or continues to fight the military war that it has fought with Turkey over 3 decades. Because simply, I think the Turkish leadership and the military will look at northern Syria as a base, as a rear base of the PKK that constitutes a strategic threat. So they will want to destroy it or destabilize it or push back against the PYD there, and that means this project will fail. So ultimately, so the PYD and the PKK down the line have interests or options to decide between that are not compatible.
And there's been many things written about the relationship of YPG, PYD, and the PKK. And I know that you work both in Iraq and Syria. And I wonder, what's your take on this relationship and how these two organizations, how closely they are affiliated? And considering the depth of their affiliation, do you think it's realistic to demand or expect that PYD to disavow itself from PKK's strategic goals?
They are, formally speaking, different organizations, but what matters, of course, is, in the end of the day, who decides? What is the chain of command? Who is at the top of the chain of command? And I think the answer is quite clear, that until now, the top of the chain of command is in Kandil, in northern Iraq, in the PKK headquarters. And if you go to northern Syria, which we do, and if you talk to the cadres of the PYD and of the YPG, I mean, you pretty much exclusively encounter people who have spent time in Kandil, sometimes quite long times, who are steeped in the ideology of the organization and who are, while Syrian, still committed to the larger PKK framework and leadership. Now, if you talk to them at length, I mean, you realize that many of those people are, in fact, quite ambiguous. You know, I mean, they tell you one thing one day on one occasion, they tell you another thing on another occasion. Many of them clearly see that what they have in Syria is something that has a value in its own right. Mm-hmm. That it is a project that might be worth preserving, and that you may not want to sacrifice for this larger struggle. You know, you would not want to go as far as provoking Turkey into considering military intervention or whatever it might be to actually destroy this project. And people are torn. I mean, the leadership, many of them in the leadership level appear to be torn between these two objectives or these two options, and they make contortions, I would say, intellectual contortions, to claim that both are actually can be pursued at the same time, which I think is not realistic.
So it's fair to say that what you argue in your article, that PYD should adhere to the regional autonomy, is shared by Syrian, at least like Syrian rank and file fighters of YPG, right?
And you can say that, but you can also say they, at the same time, share the ideology of Kandil, and they prefer not to see that down the road at some point there will have to be a decision. You know, you cannot simply not continue to wage war in Turkey and expect that the Turks will leave you alone in northern Syria forever and will leave you to build the statelet, whatever it is. You know? Mm-hmm. And the day will come when the US, the United States, declare victory against IS, mm-hmm. and then the value of the PYD and the YPG as a fighting force for the Americans will decline from once that day is passed, and so then they will be alone, and they'll need new friends, and I'm not sure if they will find any.
So that's something that I wanted to ask. Now everybody is waiting for the Raqqa operation, and we know that Syrian Democratic Forces and basically PYD will be the main ground force to fight the operation, that will be fighting in the operation. How do you think the aftermath of the operation will shape the geopolitics of the northern Syria?
Well, I think two things here. I mean, the first question is who will actually govern Raqqa once it's taken?
Exactly.
Okay, so who will govern it, and then how, of course. So we're talking about a city, we don't really know how many people are left there right now, but the original population might be around 200,000, which has not a very big Kurdish presence. So how is the YPG and then the PYD as its civilian arm going to establish governance in the city? We have seen in the non-Kurdish areas in the north that the YPG now controls, that you do have local population, local Arab residents, people involved in governance, but it very often looks pretty much like window dressing, right? I mean, you need, in the end of the day, you need to go to some PKK commander or to someone who has connections to a PKK commander if you need something done or you want something. So, I mean, that model might be good enough for Tel Abyad and places like that. For a big, major Arab city, a provincial capital, it's very unlikely that it will work. So who's going to govern Raqqa? How is this going to be done? That's a very, very important question. And it also, that's the big question mark, the larger question mark, is if this whole idea of a federal region that the PYD tries to promote, and a region that is open equally for all its residents, Kurds or Arabs or whoever they are, and all of this, I mean, to what extent this can be really filled with substance, with real governance substance. So that's question number one. And if that doesn't work, then it doesn't look good, obviously. And the second question is when and how the US will decide to move on Deir ez-Zor, which will be, or the Euphrates Valley, which with Deir ez-Zor is, of course, the main city there, which will turn eventually into the last remaining IS stronghold. And so if you want to declare victory over IS, as I think the Americans really want to do, and as soon as possible, you would want to go to Deir ez-Zor, or at least have someone go to Deir ez-Zor and take IS out, or else you cannot really declare victory in a credible way. So how are they going to do that? Which troops they are going to use? If perhaps they will encourage the Syrian regime to do the job, whether the Syrian regime can do the job. All of these are questions that are up there, and it's really difficult to see how they're going to do this. I mean, the problems that we have in Raqqa will only multiply in Deir ez-Zor. I mean, we can imagine very bad scenarios. I mean, you have, like, I believe, at least some local groups who have cooperated with IS, maybe against other local groups. You can imagine scenarios of revenge, of retribution taking place if you're not in control. And then, but how to be in control with what troops? You have in Deir ez-Zor, on top of all of it, what not many people are aware of, you still have a regime presence in Deir ez-Zor. You have to deal with that you move into the city, and then you have somebody sitting there who says, I'm representing the legitimate Syrian government, so I'm going to govern here. You know, how are you going to solve that problem? I really don't know, and that's the huge question mark, and huge obstacle down the road that the Americans will have to deal with and decide how to deal with, and what to do with the YPG and their partners in that context.
I want to go back to something you said before. You said that once the fight against ISIS is over, the US won't have this kind of a close relationship with PYD. So do you think that this alliance, if we can call this alliance, the partnership, let's say, between the US is PYD will last until ISIS is destroyed, right?
Well, I think it will last as long as the Americans think that the YPG is essential for this fight. Now, when the fight is over, then obviously it will not be essential anymore. The alternative would be that they find another force to rely on in that fight, but it's really difficult to see how that will work. I mean, the SDF, yes, the Syrian Democratic Forces, they have recruited enormous, big numbers of Arabs into this force, and Mr. McGurk is very proud of that. The question still remains, are those auxiliaries, or are these really like is this a fighting force that can function without the Kurdish element in it? That is very unclear, and I mean, I would for now err on the side of probably not, but I mean, you can't really, without going there and seeing them in action, you can't really judge. But they will have to find, if they don't want to rely on the YPG further down the line, they have to find somebody else, and it's pretty hard to see what will come. Once they decide to not need the YPG any longer, or much less, they may return to the inescapable fact that Turkey is a neighbor of Syria with like 800 kilometers of border, with a presence in Syria, with influence among rebel groups and all of this, an actor that can spoil, that can spoil any possible deal with Syria. So at the end of the day, they will also need to come back to Turkey. And when it comes to in the end, if the Americans are ever in the position to decide, okay, we don't need the YPG that much anymore, but the Turks are really, really pissed off with that, and so what do? I would suspect, in the end of the day, they would go back to their NATO partner, which is more valuable than a group that has a difficult and questionable relationship to an organization that the US themselves consider a terrorist group, which is the PKK.
I see. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Wimmen, for participating in our show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So today our guest was Mr. Heiko Wimmen, ICG's project director for Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and we discussed the developments in northern Syria and the future position of PYD. Thank you for watching us.